Welcome to another Jak and Daxter video. So this time let's talk about Errol, who you're most familiar with from Jak 2. He was originally Baron Praxis' right-hand man and commander of the original Crimzon Guard. Torn was originally commander for some unknown time. Once he realized that Baron Praxis was pretty corrupted, he moved on to the underground. Long story short, the Crimzon Guard went from, the original name to the new Crimzon Guard and then was shut down by Governor Ashlyn. Anywho, they rebranded it to Freedom League. By the way, Ashlyn wasn't governor of Haven City until Jak 3, but the point of the video is not about Ashlyn. Errol, what would I say about him? How would I describe him? Well, he's a pretty twisted, delusional character. One who would follow orders from Baron Praxis. Remember, who had made a deal with Metal Core to justify his placement in rulership. And how was that accomplished? I did talk about Baron Praxis in another video, but the point is, their deal was to attack only part of the city, to justify. But I'm not gonna get too much into that because I did talk about it in the past. And 2, having affiliation with the Darkmakers. Don't forget, Errol was trying to kill Jak during the race, right? And why? Because he was part of Underground, that's 1. He basically hated him completely at the races, that's 2. And the fact that he was an experiment who escaped. There you go. Now about the race Class 1 Knife. Knife, what does it even stand for? It was never made clear, right? Anywho, the winner of that race, the one who beat Errol, would obtain a month supply of eco. Now during this race, not only did Errol want to win, he wanted Jak. I want you, that's what he said. As in, take his life. He wants him dead. I mean, him trying to run over Jak, that's pretty straightforward, right? He tries to kill him, but he didn't succeed. He crashed straight into tons of barrels of what seemed to look like dark eco to me. It was never stated that it was dark eco by Baron Praxis. Only eco. Are we sure that's dark eco, apart from, the obvious, the color? Well, Baron did make a deal with Core, right? A supply of eco. What kind of eco did Core utilize? Seeing as how he had dark eco abilities, didn't he kill Baron with a blast of dark eco? I'm assuming Core wanted dark eco. If he had tons of dark eco in those barrels, wasn't he afraid of Core finding out? I thought of that at first, but then I told myself, hey, Baron already had his plan B after the Dark Warrior program, the whole thing with Precursor Egg. Or at that point Core just didn't care. At that point he had enough strength to reveal his original form. Due to the shield walls he wasn't able to get his power to its fullest potential. The point is, Errol came back as a Cybernetic, correct? Completely metal, actually, according to him, as opposed to the metalheads who had biological weaknesses. This was all explained by Errol. He gained leadership with the metalheads and led the new Crimzon Guard Deathbots. These robots were more originally as a prototype, run by Baron Praxis. The bots were the Blast Bots, the Guards, and the Spy. Due to Errol's advanced technology, the Darkmakers were able to communicate with him, and their plan was to get rid of Light Eco completely from Jak's world, in exchange for, well, what we most suspect was a lie. He was most likely used as a puppet. He was delusional. He thought by helping the Darkmakers he would gain this satisfaction, and at a point he believed. He was so delusional, he thought that the Darkmakers would actually be at his command. This is before facing him. He described them as poor, tortured minds, which I believe is not really the case. The Darkmakers were corrupted precursors by Dark Eco. They reached a point where they know what they're doing. They want to take over the world, but have failed multiple times. They've been to Jak's world more than once, explained by the precursor leader. Errol believed he would gain power, the opportunity the precursors can't understand. Perhaps that was the so-called deal between the two. Put the planet out of its misery? He thought of that, actually. He believed that the Darkmakers were looking for a home. True, they wanted to take over the planet, find a home, I guess. With that, I'm thinking they found a puppet. Someone from the inside. Instead of always attacking from the outside, thinking outside, they got someone from the inside. In Jak's world. I'm pretty sure it was manipulation. And this reminds me of someone. Gal and Maya. Didn't they want to reshape the world with Dark Eco? By the way, I did talk about these two. There's a possibility they're alive. I'm not gonna say much, but maybe you'd like to watch my old video. Oh, and by the way, don't forget, the Darkmakers are not defeated. This was specifically stated by the Precursor leader, that the war is not over. But why did they pick Errol specifically? I'm thinking he was at a point where he had so much hate hate and revenge for Jack. The Dark Makers thought he was weak and could easily manipulate him, so they chose him. They could easily mess with his mind. He was at a pretty rough state. Also, he was leading the Metalheads, which Jack believed they opposed one another. The Metalheads disliked the Dark Makers at some point. A guy who controls the Metalheads. If the Dark Makers hate the Metalheads, why did they pick Errol? See, this is why I believe he was more of a puppet. What do you think? I mean, could Dark Eco have made him go completely blindsided? I mean, sure, with the Baron, it was all about survival. They didn't care who would die. Survival is survival for Baron. I find this kinda weird. I mean, he went from trying to defend the city to full-on take over the world. Team up with corrupted precursors. Dark Eco. He was commander, and he thought he would be commander. Oh, and don't forget, in Daxter, he told Vigor that for the Dark Warrior program, instead of Light Eco, they must use Dark Eco. I wouldn't say he told Vigor that because he loves Dark Eco, he was simply following Baron's orders. But I'm thinking of something else here. Jack was able to survive Dark Eco. Other people were put under the Warrior program who died. Since he saw Jack in shape, nothing happened to him, also gained powers. Maybe he thought, hey, Dark Eco isn't so bad after all. Maybe I could try. He thought that Dark Eco wouldn't affect him negatively. So that right there we can say that's what also convinced him to team up with the Dark Makers. Okay, now let's forget Dark Eco for a bit. The biggest question of all right now is how the heck did Errol turn into a robot? I honestly had no idea at first, okay? It was never specifically stated in Jack 3. All we did back then was speculate. Try and guess. What I recently found out is that the Jack Trilogy DVD, which released back in 2007, which was never really released to the public, was part of a competition for the PS2. Anywho, Daxter narrates a lot. In Jack 3, shortly before they encounter Errol, Daxter believed that his Crimzon Guard death pots helped him turn into Cybernetic. This was specifically at the KG War Factory, which was located in the industrial section of Haven. I mean, it was most likely produced within the factory.
So it was up to us, once again, to save the world and make our way up to the floating war factory high overhead. It turns out Errol was running the place. He had survived his little eco explosion in our last adventure and had been rebuilt by his fellow Crimzon bots.
Sure, there's the Crimzon logo on his body. Maybe a lot of you told yourselves, oh, okay, it's probably his Crimzon death bots who helped them, okay. But I always thought it was just that. Okay, he had a piece of metal which was part of the robots, prototypes, but I never thought of them actually helping him. Now, some bots can be pretty smart. I mean, look at UR86 from Jack X, who was a pain in the butt, by the way. Now, was Daxter telling the truth? Or he believed it was the Crimzon Guards? Like, did he just believe it or thought? I mean, he could have just assumed, but I know a lot of people are going to say, okay, if Daxter said that, then that's what the developers planned. So that's the answer. Okay, you got a point. But then Daxter looks at Errol's feet. He's like, what? Why do they look like that? At that moment, I thought, hey, maybe the Dark Makers had something to do with this? They did him a favor? You know, he was into contact with Dark Eco, which could have easily corrupted his mind completely. Remember, Dark Eco plays a different role on everyone. It acts different. So the Dark Makers perhaps saw that as a nice package deal. Someone with hate and revenge who was corrupted by Dark Eco. And looking at the feet of the Cybernetic, they really remind us of the Troopers. I mean, if you compare it to UR86, I mean, his feet could have looked like that. He's a robot made within that factory. To me, it looks very Dark Maker inspired. But if they were the ones who made him like that, he gained the ability to communicate after he turned cybernetic, right? Unless he met a Dark Maker before? We aren't too sure of their nature, actually. I did talk about this as well. Like, do they have an actual leader? If the war isn't over and they keep coming back, there must be a leader out there, right? I mean, wouldn't it be more logical to bring him back to life in exchange for taking over the world? I mean, that's a pretty big step. As I said before, he was trying to defend the city and then wants to take over the world. I mean, he wanted to barge into the Metalhead nest in Jack 2, remember? And then he becomes a leader. So for sure, Dark Eco and the Dark Makers brainwashed him somehow. And the fact, assuming, well, it's not 100% true, as I said, it's the Crimzon Guards, according to Daxter, but if the Dark Makers did turn him into a robot in exchange for taking over the world, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. But the way he looks, there's no sign of Dark Eco. He's fully mechanical. And we can agree, okay, this is part of the Crimzon Guard factory. Okay. Did the Dark Makers think? Just imagining it's them. If they turned him like that. If they turned him like the Trooper, let's say. We don't really know what the Troopers are, actually, as I said. Maybe they didn't want to make him too much like that, too much into contact with Dark Eco. Maybe that would corrupt his mind too much and completely sabotaging their plan. I mean, he quickly went from A to B. Defend a city, destroy a world, whatever. Something really affected his mind. Now, what about Vigor? He's more of a personal enemy to Jack. He wanted to evolve into a precursor. Becoming a precursor doesn't involve Dark Eco, so I don't think Vigor had anything to do with Errol. So with that being said, guys, I think this is it for the video. I've said enough. If you have any questions or stuff like that, as usual, do your stuff, and as always, I've been Vivi, and thank you so much for watching.